There's a truck going right everywhere. Hi, everybody. Welcome to session number 15, using play to develop risk and resilience in your classroom. I'm Kristi Mraz, and my other half is Christine, and you will see her beautiful face shortly. And we are so excited to be joining you on this Saturday afternoon. Hopefully you've moved from coffee to cocktails, which will make this more fun for everyone. Just a quick little note about us. I'm Kristi. I have the brown hair, and I'm a kindergarten teacher in New York City. I've worked with Christine now for 3 years. She is a third grade teacher in Vermont, and together we've been doing a lot of work with kids and play and risk and resilience and many other things. And so we're really excited to share some of our thinking with you. So take it away, Christine.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you. I'm going to launch right into what we're doing today and pull up the slideshow. You can see below that those are our Twitter handles, CE Hertz and Mraz Christine. And the first thing that I want to talk about is why this topic. Why did we decide to think about risk and resiliency with children and play in the classroom? The first thing that we started to notice was that even though expectations were increasing, engagement was decreasing, and students were showing signs of distress. Students were no longer the focus of curriculum. They seemed to need this magical teaching desk to learn anything that was bestowed by teachers. And this was then leading to behavioral challenges. Children in my third grade classroom were having a hard time problem solving or collaborating in small groups. And we were thinking that maybe without having the context of play to practice these complex skills, they're just not getting the chance that they need. So we thought, how can we empower and engage children in their own learning? And how can we use what we know about learning through play to help children apply that to all of their learning? Our first step was to look into Carol Dweck's work on mindset, and we were amazed and blown away, and life was changed. We figured out that we could help children learn that their learning was not magic dust sprinkled from teachers, but instead relied on their effort to grow their brains.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we decided to do next. So we started to think about all the different ways that we could help kids develop the sort of resiliency and engagement and energy towards learning that we hoped they would have. So we did a lot of reading. We read pretty much everything we could think of. And we found that it's not just one thing to help kids learn to do that results in energized and engaged learning, but instead it involves a constellation of stances, a group of ideas, a way of living that when put together is greater than its whole, kind of like a constellation. And we found that it was helpful to teach a few different ways of looking at the world instead of just one. Persistence alone isn't as helpful as persistence combined with empathy and resilience. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk about the different big ideas, the different stances we taught our classes. So the first one we tackled was empathy. So just talking about this quick slide and the picture up at the top, empathy is the idea that you can feel another's feelings in your own heart, which means that when working with kids, we're really helping them think about not just their own place in the world, but also other people's places in the world, being able to come out of themselves and talk and think about other people's positions. And so we found this great quote from The Roots of Empathy that said, "Children who develop social and emotional competence are happier, have more rewarding relationships with their peers, are resilient in the face of stress, and perform even better academically." So the picture shows a drawing that came from a conversation between kids that was a a little girl had told a story about how she saw someone drop their ice cream, and it made her feel sad for them because they didn't have ice cream anymore. And so we put that picture right up on the chart, and the boxes below were quick little moments of empathy. We found empathy to be one of the most important stances we wanted to be teaching to kids because in thinking about who we'd like in the world, we want people who are thinking about others, not just themselves.
The next stance that we started thinking about was flexibility. And this quote from Art Costa says that, hold on just one second. Okay, sorry. This is something new for all of us. So this quote from Art Costa's book, Habits of Mind, says that flexible people have the capacity to change their minds as they receive additional data. They engage in multiple and simultaneous outcomes and activities, and they draw upon a repertoire of problem-solving strategies. To us, this sounded like teaching to a T, and was really helpful to think about how we could teach this to our children. So instead of just thinking about, I can do it and I can try something, and persisting, instead thinking about, if something goes wrong, what else can I try? And we do this all the time. And if you think about the last time you were driving through town and hit a closed road, then you...
Sorry, Kristi, I'm just going to cut in again.
Oh, yes.
The echoing is definitely happening.
Okay.
So don't mute your Hangout. You're going to mute your computer itself.
Oh my gosh. Okay, hold on a second.
Try that.
Okay, is that better?
Kristi, maybe you should mute yours too. Maybe that might be.
Okay.
Is that better?
Muted.
All right. Christine, speak.
Hey, Brian, I think if I mute my computer, I can't hear anything.
Okay. It's definitely working now, though.
So I should just talk without hearing anything. Great.
All right, you know what?
No, I can try.
Yeah, I still kind of hear it. So sorry, everyone. Go back to what you're doing. Whatever works for you guys, and I'll just do some behind-the-scenes thing here and try.
If I speak and mute my computer, can you still hear me?
Yeah, because it's coming through the microphone that's in the headphone.
Great. So I'll just mute my computer and then keep going.
Okay.
So I'm going to take this from the top. I'm sorry about that, everyone. It is the reality of trying something new like this. So we are going to persevere, and we're going to be flexible and optimistic. So when you're thinking about flexibility, if you think about the last time you drove through town and you hit a closed road, you didn't panic or stop or abort your trip to the grocery store, but instead you figured out a way around the closed road. Maybe you used your smartphone, maybe you just knew your town well enough. But as I was saying earlier, teachers do this really well. We're super flexible when it comes to hitting roadblocks. When something doesn't go wrong in a lesson, we can model more explicitly, or maybe add movement, or do something that will help our children learn this. But flexibility is kind of hard for children. Often they find that once they've tried one way, they just give up. And when it comes to third graders, sometimes when they try one way to solve a math problem, they just can't tackle another way. So instead of, as this photo suggests, we started using the phrase switch it up with my class. And so we're trying to teach children that instead of just giving up after one way has worked, or has not worked rather, then we can switch it up and do what Arthur Costa said, which was draw on a repertoire of problem-solving strategies. Children do this naturally in play. If one child says, no, we're not going to the grocery store, we're going to the movie theater, then they'll switch up their repertoire of play strategies, and they can do that fluidly and naturally. So what we're trying to do as teachers is figure out a way for them to do this without our coaching and in academics and automatically to make this a habit.
Okay, so the next big thing that we learned about and studied about and decided to teach our classes about was resilience, which we defined as bouncing back from trouble spots. There's this great quote: if you're not experiencing failure, then you're making a far worse mistake. You're being driven by a desire to avoid it. So we really looked at our classrooms and thought resilience would be something that would be beneficial to everyone there, mostly because as you work with young kids, you can see the kids who encounter failure or trouble spots and just keep going, and the kids who just stop. And if you're not trying to do something, you're not learning. And so resilience was one of the things that we felt it would be really important to teach kids about. These stances in some children seem really natural and things that they do, but in other kids, for various reasons, it's just not things that they've had a lot of exposure to.
The next stance that we started thinking about was optimism. And optimism we defined as feeling hopeful that risks are worth taking. I am being very optimistic right now about this, and I'm having a good time too. And that problems will work themselves out, which hopefully they have done with my audio. Many young children are great risk takers. If you think about a 2-year-old, you might think of them jumping off something or throwing almost anything, or in their intentional play, playing without concern about how this scenario is going to work out. But our challenge as teachers is to keep that optimism going through their academic learning. Keep them asking, what if, and seeing positive possibilities instead of negative possibilities. So this week in my class, we worked on thinking positively about writing, about being optimistic and just putting down ideas and hoping that they will work themselves out. We've been thinking about being positive when it comes to difficult math problems, and also thinking about I can try versus I can do it. In this photo, this is a 3rd grader who was just trying to put down any words he could to start his story. And there's a Post-it note there to remind him to say to himself, I can try.
So another thing we taught our kids was this idea that persistence is something worth trying. I teach kindergarten, where one of the most common ailments that occurs in the classroom is at lunchtime, when you are approached by 20 out of 26 kids saying, I can't open this, I can't rip off the top of my Go-Gurt, I can't get the container off, I can't unscrew something. And so really we thought about the need for some persistence, because oftentimes many of those little things can be done with a little more time and effort. So in the picture above, that's from my kindergarten classroom. We started this idea that brains can grow, and on the top left was our visual icon about persistence. There's the block. It fell down, and they rebuilt it afterwards. Persistence is really about the idea that if you stick with something a little bit longer, you might be able to do it. We put a little quote in there: when the going gets tough, the tough get going, which is said by parents everywhere. One little caveat around persistence is that we learn that persistence in and of itself has value, but it has much more value when paired with empathy, with resilience, with flexibility, with optimism. We all know or have a friend maybe in a relationship that's not really working out, and they're just trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. In your mind, you're like, you really need to break up. But they're like, relationships are work. We need to stick with it. And so one of the things we want to make sure we temper persistence with is reflection and thinking about, what am I really trying to accomplish here? It's definitely important for kids to learn to stick with a task, but not with a task that's not proving to be worthwhile or valuable for them. So Christine's going to take us to the next idea.
So we started thinking about all of these stances, and then thinking about where we were as teachers and where education was in our country and in our public schools, and thinking about what kind of classrooms can make these and help these stances thrive and grow. And we came to a couple of things that we really feel are almost non-negotiables for classrooms. The first is ensuring time for play. And as a third grade teacher, it's especially hard to advocate for play. It's especially hard to advocate to parents how play is helping their children learn more than memorizing their multiplication tables would. But really, even small amounts of playtime, choice time for a few minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, or weaving playfulness into your curriculum with drama, dance, song, or just generally a playful stance is extraordinarily important. Children learn through play, and it's important to remember that this is their natural state. The other thing that we found is that we need to teach in a responsive manner. We fully acknowledge that there are standards that we are teaching towards, but we also acknowledge that learning is based on just right risks. And we think a lot about the zone of proximal development and what do children know and what are they right on the cusp of. And the workshop model and using reading and writing and even choice time workshops can really be a place to fit all of these things in. So the whole class, small groups, and one-on-one instruction opportunities are perfect for including things like a playful stance to learning and zones of proximal development for your whole class, for small groups, and for one-on-one conferences with students. And most importantly, we've found that making children the center of the curriculum is where we need to stand firmest. What are your children naturally engaged in and playing with or interested in? Take time to watch and think about what's happening in your classroom when you're not on, when the children are taking the lead. One quick example from this in my third grade class is that the first week of school, before I had any chance to start partnerships, all of a sudden children were picking out multiple copies of the same book. They were finding somebody who was interested in the same book, and they were starting their own partnerships with me having nothing to do with it. And so all of a sudden that small thing made me shift my curriculum and think about what I needed to be doing to make their learning more social. So Kristi's going to
Here's where we're at so far. We talked about all the different stances that we found in our reading, and working with kids seemed really important. Christine just talked to you a little bit about just general fundamental things in our classroom to make this work successful. But now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how we helped kids become more optimistic, more resilient, more flexible, and more empathic. So our first entry point was about helping kids know that these things exist. There's an idea about becoming conscious of your surrounding that help you see the thing everywhere. For example, if you're thinking about getting new bangs in your haircut, you look around and you're like, I like those bangs, I don't like those bangs. Suddenly you see bangs everywhere. We took that same theory that when you know something, you become more aware of it, and applied it to these things like resilience and flexibility and persistence, and we introduced it. We made them we made our classes conscious of things like persistence and resilience and flexibility, times when it did happen, times when it didn't happen, times when it could happen, times when it maybe shouldn't happen. So the first thing we did was we introduced a stance, something like optimism or flexibility, through either a shared experience, a read aloud, or a video. So we'd take a look at a book, for example. It could be like Mo Willems' Leonardo the Terrible Monster, where the main character, Leonardo the Terrible Monster, has this moment when he really understands the other child's position and makes a change based on understanding where that child was. In reading that book, kindergartners kind of began to get a grasp on what it really meant to be empathic, what it meant to understand someone's point of view and make a change because of it. Only once they understood the experience did we then name it and say, that thing when you feel like you're in someone else's shoes and you kind of want to act differently because of it, that's called empathy. You could also recreate this experience through a shared experience. If a child bumps their head and someone says, I once bumped my head, it really hurts, maybe we should get him ice, that's an empathic experience for a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old. And also taking a look at people's faces in play. Two kids who are playing Star Wars and one suddenly frowning might make a child remember, this is how I used to I felt before when I felt bad about something, I'm going to change what I'm doing because this person isn't feeling good right now. Only after making sure kids understood the concept did we worry about naming it. That thing, that's empathy. That thing, that's persistence. That thing, that's resilience. Once we named it and explained it, then we looked for examples everywhere. In kindergarten, we had little things that said resilient, persistent, optimistic. And as soon as a child did something that could fall under those categories, we threw a label on them and said, you're persistent, you're optimistic, I should rephrase that, you're acting persistent, you're acting flexible, you're acting empathic, so that kids could start to understand their own mechanisms when they were doing it. It would catch on like wildfire because all of a sudden kids started to see it everywhere. Oh, he couldn't get his bag zipped, but he tried again. He was being persistent. Oh, her blocks fell down, but then she tried to build it a different way. She's being resilient. Oh, I couldn't figure it out this way, so I tried another way. I was just being flexible. So the first thing we found to be helpful is that teaching kids what the stance feels like, naming it, explaining it, and then looking for subsequent examples gave kids power to recreate those moments.
And before I shift to the next way that you can help children with this, one quick story from my classroom is that this fall we've been starting our first personal narratives, and out of my 22 students, I would say that 7 have personal narratives that go along with the theme of trying something again and taking a risk. So some of them are, I crashed my bike the first time I rode my bike. And so it's once you start looking for this stance and finding this stance, then it's not only that you can find it in the world outside of you, but you can also put that into the world and reframe your experiences in that way. The next help use these stances is through self-talk. So anytime that you tried something new, there's a voice in your head. And sometimes that voice is giving you tips and encouragement and saying, you can do it, or what if you, I'm thinking about when I was learning to rock climb, what if you put your left foot up on that little ledge? And sometimes your voice is kind of taking you into the spiral of doom, where it's saying like, well, if you put your foot on that ledge, you are going to fall and you are going to get hurt. And so these moments of self-talk that happen in our brain, Brené Brown calls them little gremlins that can live in our brain, are really important to how we view the world and how we get through challenges and take risks. So Philippa Perry in How to Stay Sane said that there are neural pathways that actually promote the self-talk we use the most. If you take a moment to think about that, then that means if you're saying, I can't, then more and more you're used to just failing and not succeeding and taking risks and expecting to fail. So it's really important that we get children to self-talk and to talk in their heads when we're not around and when we're not there to model for them all of the phrases that can help them. And on this chart here, this is a chart I made with my 3rd graders last year, about halfway through the year when we started thinking about what self-talk phrases are helpful to our brains, and yes, those are brains, and which are hurtful. And so thinking about things like, I can do this, or just figure one thing out at a time, or my brain will grow if I keep trying. It's so much more helpful than I can't go any further, or why are we even doing this, or why did Miss Hertz make us do this? That was probably one that I heard quite a bit in the negative category. And that's something that you want to really help your children promote, is when they're trying something difficult, to have pathways that are leading their brains to think that they will be successful and they will be able to engage with all the stances. I can try this. I can be optimistic. I can be flexible. And then you can gear the stance to what the gear the self-talk to the stance that the child needs. And so I can try this might help them be a little bit more optimistic versus do I know another way might help them be more flexible. And then once you've practiced this with partners, once they have practiced this in their play or in art or by building something and watching it fall and practicing saying these self-talk phrases out loud, then you want them to try and internalize these phrases. And one way you can do that is by keeping it close with a tool or with a habit. Often we use sticky notes to remind kids, and just as you would when you confer, you can draw a quick sticky note with a quick self-talk phrase and then keep that close to the child throughout the course of the day. Kristi is going to take it away now with another way that we can help children engage with these stances.
So we're going to talk a little bit now about the importance of storytelling. So storytelling has a wide variety of really positive uses in the classroom, from helping kids build oral language to developing narrative structure to helping build a community. What you may not know, and what I didn't know until I started doing some more research with Christina around this topic, is that our brains are actually wired to make stories of things. Daniel Pink, in his book, A Whole New Mind, talks a lot about storytelling, and so does Philippa Perry in the book How to Stay Sane. How storytelling is how you begin to understand your identity. When you storytell in a classroom, what you're really doing is creating the origin myth of your class. And so storytelling, in addition to all the wonderful support for oral language and narrative structure, also helps kids begin to understand who they are. There's this great Kurt Vonnegut quote, "We are who we pretend to be." The second part of that is, so we must be careful who we pretend to be. I guess the way other people might say it is fake it till you make it. When we tell stories, we help ourselves to understand how we acted, why we acted, and it also gives us a way to think about acting in the future. So storytelling is one of the most powerful tools at your disposal to help your children a lot of motorcycles. Okay, we're back. That was just resilience. You're welcome. Okay, so anyway, storytelling is one of the most important ways that you can help children start to see themselves in a really powerful light. So one of the best ways to do this is to use photographs of things that are happening in real time, if you can, if that's something accessible to you. On the right, you'll see a picture of a line of snap cubes that goes out the door. This was a project that kids had taken on for a really surprisingly long time to try and make the longest snap cube spaceship they could. They had drawn maps, all these things, and it kept breaking and breaking and breaking. And finally, they got out the door with it. And so when they finally got out the door with it, and even on the way, we sat down in a circle at the end of our choice time to share the idea, to share the story. And the story needs to be co-constructed, because children are, when they're telling a story, are trying to make sense of the right side of their brain, and the left side of the brain. They're trying to unite the feeling side with the language side. And so what you're helping them do is to put words to the experience. So we might say, so one October afternoon, the Spaceship Center in Choice Time was trying to lay the world's longest spaceship in the entire world, and then invite the Spaceship Center to add in what they were feeling. One child might say, like, I felt like we could do it. Another child might say, I felt frustrated when it kept breaking. And you're going to help kids bring that all together into a story where you get to slide in a big idea, where you might say, and they tried and it didn't work, but they didn't give up. They thought again and said, what if we did this? And they tried it and it still didn't work. And then they talked and had a big idea and decided, what if we put it on the floor? And they did it and it worked. We're the type of kids that when something gets hard, we think about how we could try it differently, and we do it differently. Storytelling, when told in service of really positive, energizing, engaging stances, then allow you to revisit them often in other situations. Remember, if you're in writing time and a child is feeling a little bit frustrated about something, you can say, remember when you worked and you made that long block, that long spaceship, let's tell that story again. Let's think about how that can help us in writing. Storytelling helps kids to understand who they are in the best possible way. And we can help frame kids to do that in really healthy ways rather than helping kids to develop stories that might be negative to their self-image. If blocks accidentally fall over and a child says you ruined it to another child, that child may begin to tell a story to themselves about how they ruin things. We want to step in and make sure that we help kids see the positive, engaging, and energizing aspect of their existence. So storytelling at the end of choice time, at the end of writing workshop, at the beginning of reading workshop helps kids begin to think about themselves in really positive and proactive ways. And Christine is going to take us to another big idea.
So another big idea that we had about these stances was reflection, and the importance of reflection in our teaching and in reflection with our classes and any time we're trying to learn something new. Anytime that you're making true growth, you have to pause for a moment and think to yourself, what just happened? Why did that work? Why did that fail? Where can I go from here? And so if you're thinking about this summer, I took up mountain biking a little bit more aggressively than I had before. And there was one bridge that I spent most of the summer trying to get over. And for the first half of the summer, I was framing it in my reflection as, why did I fail? And thinking about what, I didn't fall off every time and I didn't break anything, which is good. But why didn't it go the way I wanted it to go? And then once I actually crossed this bridge on my mountain bike, then why did that go? Why did I get across it? How did I get across it? What did I do? What moves did I make? And what can I learn from that? And what can I do to move forward as a mountain biker? So then when we're thinking about our children and learning, it's important to be reflecting on all of our learning, but also on the stances. How did optimism help me? How can I be more flexible? What happened in this scenario and what might help? So when we think about reflection, we think about this as an opportunity to have whole class conversations. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. First of all, having whole class conversations about something tricky is a great opportunity for kids to feel less isolated. If you're thinking about the stories that they're framing in their brain and one kid is starting to see themselves as somebody who has a really hard time with writing or with math, then having a whole class conversation where other kids get the opportunity to say, yeah, that's hard. Yeah, we fail at that. It can be really helpful for those kids not to feel so isolated. The other reason is that it builds community. And just as Kristi was saying that you're building the origin myth of your class, reflections offer another opportunity to build this class culture where you value risk-taking, you value resiliency. And so by using this whole class conversation to reflect, then we're able to build this strong sense of who we are as empowered and engaged learners. And we believe that you run these conversations very similarly to the way you would run a grand conversation about a read aloud, where you would use them to build ideas, build a sense of togetherness. Humor is also important. Have we mentioned that? So the way you do this is you start with a really engaging question or provocation. You might have an opportunity where you would think of something like a question like, what do you think of ... or I wonder why, or maybe there was a scenario in play or choice time or recess or snack where you might say, I noticed that this happened. I just saw something really tricky or exciting. And then you pose this to the class, and the class has a conversation. Just as with a grand conversation, the students are both working on the content of what can we do next time and also conversational skills. And so there's emphasis on both of those things throughout the whole conversation. At some point in your conversation, you shift from what went wrong, how did we fail, to what's next. And how can this new learning, this new aha moment that we've come together as a class and created, how can that really empower us as learners? There are other opportunities for reflection that might be more individual, and in this example that you can see on the screen, Kristi's created an example for a learning plan, a reflection plan for one kindergarten student. So each time of day, writing, lunch, choice time, and reading are blocked off there, and then the child has chosen in writing that they were going to work on empathy. At lunch, they were going to work on safety, which is very important in kindergarten. At choice time, they were going to work on persistence, and at the end of the day in reading, they were going to work on resilience. And then on the final column, the empty column, the child would reflect on how they did it. What moments did they actually practice empathy? Or how were they safe? How were they persistent? When were they resilient? And so taking moments in addition to the whole group reflection times, but also to have the small one-on-one reflection moments as well. Kristi is going to wrap it up now, and then we have a few minutes, so if you have questions, feel free to tweet them out.
Okay. Thanks for sticking with us on this Saturday afternoon. So these are sort of our big final thoughts. I'm just going to recap some of the big stuff we talked about and then get you thinking towards the days ahead, because, you know, Christine and I are both teachers too. We'll be back on Monday, so we want to be thinking towards that. So sort of in the big recap, we found that there were 5 really helpful stances to teach kids: empathy, persistence, resilience, flexibility, and optimism. They are not the only 5 in the world, but those are 5 that we found were really helpful in our classrooms for our kids. And Christine and I, in talking, found that in our classrooms, we have the 2 different places that we need to emphasize things. Just in my kindergarten classroom recently, I had a little girl get really upset at herself that she couldn't draw a bird. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is optimism is going to be really important for us. Last year, there was a lot about persistence and flexibility. So these 5 stances need to, for us, work together, but you may spend more time on one than the other. We worked up child-friendly definitions so that it would be easy to name and explain them to kids when the time arose. We introduced them in really explicit ways. We either watched a video, or we read a book, or we talked about a shared experience, and we tried to put a tag on that. That right there, that's optimism. And then from that tag, we start to look for it in ourselves and others. And like anything, once you're aware of it, positive and negative, you're more likely to see it. Once you become attuned to trash on the street, you often see more of it. So we wanted to help draw kids' attention to the really positive ways that they could be in the world. Being college and career ready is not about, standard, L19. Being college and career ready is being the type of person who can live in the world empathically, resiliently, with flexibility, with persistence, who knows that they are an agent in their own learning, in their own life, that they have power. And that's what it comes down to. We help to keep the stances alive by teaching into self-talk and storytelling. Self-talk is something that's really interesting because I wasn't aware of how negative my own self-talk was until Christine and I started researching it. I moved from, in my runs, just saying to myself, this is the worst, this is the worst, this is the worst, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying, to saying, you can do it, one more foot, you can do it, one more foot, if you can walk, you can run, if you can walk, you can run. When going into a party, instead of thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm never going to meet anyone, where's the snacks? I think to myself, who knows who you'll meet? They'll probably be good snacks. So thinking about self-talk and storytelling keeps these ideas alive and keeps them moving. Throughout the course of the year, what we had brought out started to sink in. And so there weren't so many times when we needed to say explicitly, now's the time for optimism, because it began to be a part of kids' existence. And again, some kids were already really comfortable in these stances, but not everyone. And with the increased stress on teachers, it can be easy to overlook how important it is for kids to feel good about their own power and their own learning. The last thing the last thing that I want to say is that as you're moving forward, you're really thinking about who you want to help be in the world. Who are you looking, thinking about the kids we have in our classrooms today will be the future tomorrow. And looking at your class and thinking, do they believe in themselves? Do they understand the importance of caring and thinking about others? And the next question is, where will you start tomorrow? So changing the world isn't going to happen overnight, but it is going to happen with something that you do tomorrow, and a little bit more the next day, and a little bit more the next day. And so turn and talk to yourself. No, just kidding. But think for a moment about which of these things you feel like you could kind of tap on and grab to think about. So we have a few questions. So here's one. What videos and books did you use to introduce each stance? From Emily Morris. Hey, Emily Morris, thanks for viewing. And so I'll say a few, and then Christine, I'll go Christine, and then you say your few. Okay.
Okay.
So we use a couple of different things. Some things that I really like doing. Worm Builds by Kathy Capole was great for thinking about persistence. Bunny Cakes was great for thinking about persistence, flexibility, resilience. A book, there's It's Okay to Make Mistakes by Todd Parr. Lily the Unicorn, and it's like a crime because I'm blanking on the author's name, but if you type in Lily the Unicorn, that was another great book to talk about taking chances. Ninja, which has been sort of hot on Twitter lately, is an amazing job talking about resilience. And we actually used a Sesame Street video to look at the power of yet. It was just really hot on YouTube. Okay, Christine, say some things.
Two that I really love. One is Andrea Beattie's two books, Iggy Peck Architect and Rosie Revere Engineer. They're kind of partner books, and they both are super with optimism, persistence, failure, resilience, all the things that we're going towards. And the other was Beautiful Oops, which is a really simple art book, but it's a really powerful message about how one mistake can just be transferred and made into something beautiful. Those are the two that come to mind right away. There are also a lot that we've been using in the last couple of weeks on empathy, A Home for Bird, Oliver, are a couple, and there's one called The Fantastic Elastic Brain, which is really powerful in teaching children about their brains and how they can help grow their brains.
Okay, and then as Christine was talking, of course, I thought of like 17 more. Many of these books, if you look through your library with an eye on whether these demonstrate these different things, they will pop out to you more. One thing to think about also is using life examples from kids, really thinking about watching your kids for evidence of these things and using those, so not only just using Read Aloud but also using the experience of kids. Then another thing to think about is looking into pop culture. Star Wars has been an incredible source of inspiration in terms of resilience and optimism. Last year we watched that clip of Luke trying to raise the ship out of the swamp with Yoda and his frustration and how he worked through it. But you could take clips from all through Star Wars, and superheroes as well are a great source of inspiration for modeling yourself after some superheroes, modeling yourself in a way that's flexible and empathic and persistent. As far as books for teachers, we had a question come up. Forgive me. I'm looking for Lori Pandorf, hi Lori, asked us about the people who have influenced our work. So we started with Carol Dweck's Mindset, and then we moved into reading just books about the brain and books about developing positive self-image. So we read things from psychoanalysts to neurologists to educators. So Philippa Perry wrote a book called How to Stay Sane. It's for adults, but there's a lot of really good, interesting information in there. Neurocomic is a graphic novel about the brain, which is interesting for your own information as a teacher. And we read about 1 billion things. Habits of Mind, which is like pretty heavy duty. We also read for a lot of great stuff. And you can read our book coming out in 2015, which will do all of these things as well. I'm looking, this is sort of the next few minutes. If you have maybe one more question, you can tweet it at us.
Kristi, can I jump in with 2 other titles that I think were really powerful?
Yes.
Okay, Visible Learners, or Visible Learning by John Hattie, and then Drive by Daniel Pink. I think those were 2 that really stuck out for me as well.
I think this draws our session to a close. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. You can follow us both on Twitter. I'm at Mraz Christine. Christine is at CE Hertz. We will tweet out again, so you'll be able to see our hashtags, or not our hashtags, our handles. We have a book, as previously mentioned, coming out in summer of 2015 around some of this work, and we wish you the best moving forward.
Thanks so much.